In the far reaches of the galaxy, a mysterious transmission echoed through the vastness of space. It was an unexpected event, one that caught the attention of the Galactic Council. The message was short, direct, and written in simple human language. "We're coming, and we don't care about your rules." At first, the Galactic Council laughed. The message was so blunt, so strange, that they couldn't take it seriously. They were a powerful organization, made up of the most advanced and ancient species in the galaxy. Who could possibly threaten them? Who would dare send such a message to them? The Council's leaders dismissed it as a prank. It was probably from some lesser-known species trying to make a name for themselves. They had no reason to worry. The galaxy was under the Council's control, and no one dared challenge it. But something was different this time. The message had arrived through secure channels, ones not easily accessed. The humans, a young and rapidly growing species, had somehow sent it. And though they were small compared to the other members of the Council, their growing influence in the galaxy was undeniable. Still, the Council remained unshaken. They were sure it was a joke, an attempt to stir up trouble. No one could be foolish enough to challenge the entire galaxy, one Council member said with a chuckle. The others agreed, nodding in agreement. The humans were unpredictable, yes, but there was no way they could pose a real threat. The message had come from a human ship, just one ship. It was a small craft compared to the mighty warships and fleets the Council controlled, and yet there was something about it that made the Council uneasy. The human ships were known to be strange and difficult to predict. They didn't follow the same rules as everyone else, and they didn't play by the usual tactics. In fact, they often mocked authority, and their wild, reckless behavior had earned them a reputation. The message, though simple, was a declaration that humanity would no longer be bound by the rules of the Galactic Council. They were coming, and they were going to make themselves known. The vastness of space stretched before the human fleet as they sailed toward the heart of Galactic Council territory. On board the flagship Freedom's Call, Captain Mark Steele stood, his hands resting on the controls. He had always been a man of action, and today was no different. The stars outside the windows seemed to shimmer with anticipation, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Humanity's moment had finally arrived. Mark wasn't afraid, not even a little. He was confident, maybe even too confident, but that was the way humans were. They took on challenges no one else would even dare to face. And today they were going to show the Galactic Council just what they were made of. "All systems ready, Captain," said Lieutenant Kim, standing at a console beside him. She was calm, professional, but even she couldn't hide the hint of excitement in her voice. They were about to make history. "Good," Mark replied with a grin. "Let's make a statement they'll never forget." Their mission was simple. They had been sent to confront the Galactic Council, to send a message that humanity would no longer be under their thumb. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it was exactly what Mark had been waiting for. The Council thought they could control everything, every race, every planet, every piece of territory. Well, humanity was about to prove them wrong. The Freedom's Call was not a large ship. Compared to the enormous, advanced warships of the Council, it looked like a toy. But that was part of the plan. The humans weren't here to play by the rules. They didn't have the technology the Council did, nor the resources. What they had, however, was something far more valuable: the spirit to stand up for themselves, no matter the odds. Mark's ship entered the space around the Council's capital. It was a place where the richest, most powerful species gathered to make decisions for the galaxy. The space was bustling with ships from all over, a testament to the Council's reach and power. As Mark's fleet approached, the Council's defense systems quickly locked onto them. Several ships surrounded Freedom's Call, their weapons primed and ready. It was a show of force, a warning. But the humans didn't flinch. "Captain, we're being hailed," Lieutenant Kim said, her fingers quickly tapping away at the controls. "Let's see what they want," Mark said with a smirk. He stood tall, ready for whatever came next. He wasn't nervous. If anything, he was enjoying this. Humanity had been held back for too long, and now it was time to turn the tables. On the screen in front of them, the image of a tall alien leader appeared. His species was known for their ancient wisdom and calm demeanor, a typical representative of the Galactic Council. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain arrogance in his eyes. "Human vessel," the alien said in a deep, booming voice. "You are entering restricted space. Cease your approach immediately, or face the consequences." Mark leaned forward and chuckled. "You're really going to threaten us? With what? Your outdated weapons and your boring laws." He paused, grinning as he glanced at his crew. "I've got news for you, pal. We don't care about your rules." The alien's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't expecting such an answer. "This is your final warning," he said. "Leave now, or we will be forced to act." Mark smiled. "I don't think you understand," he said, crossing his arms. "We're not here to follow your rules. We're here to change them." With that, Mark ordered the fleet to move forward. The Freedom's Call surged ahead, and the rest of the human ships followed closely behind. The Council's ships raised their weapons, but they hesitated for just a moment, just enough time for. The human fleet moved boldly, undeterred by the flashing warning lights and defensive maneuvers of the Galactic Council's ships. The Freedom's Call led the charge, its engines humming with energy, cutting through the quiet space with confidence. Mark Steele stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the screen, watching as the Council's ships slowly surrounded them. "Captain," Lieutenant Kim said, her voice steady but filled with tension. "They're locking onto us. Their weapons are online." Mark didn't flinch. "Let them. They'll have to do better than that." The Council had expected the humans to retreat, to be intimidated by their superior weapons and ancient technologies. They had assumed the humans were nothing more than a small, unruly species that didn't understand their place in the galaxy. But they were wrong. Mark Steele wasn't the type to back down, not when humanity had so much to prove. "Open a channel to the Council," Mark said with a calm that only masked the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Kim nodded and activated the communication system. A moment later, the screen flickered, and the same tall alien leader appeared. His expression was no longer calm. His eyes now burned with irritation. "This is your final warning, human," the alien said, his voice laced with authority. "Cease your advance, or we will fire." Mark leaned forward, his hands resting on the controls. A confident grin spread across his face. "You're right. It's your final warning." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But you're the ones who should be leaving." The alien's eyes widened in shock. The Council wasn't used to being spoken to like this. For a moment, the galaxy's greatest powers seemed to freeze, unsure of how to react. Mark took the opportunity to make his move. "Release the pulse," he ordered. At his command, the Freedom's Call fired a special EMP pulse, one designed to disrupt the Council's weapon systems. The pulse shot through space like a shockwave, sweeping across the surrounding ships. In an instant, the Council's defensive systems powered down, their weapons deactivated, and their communication networks scrambled. The alien on the screen sputtered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice rising. Mark chuckled, his tone dripping with amusement. "Oh, I just gave you a little taste of how unpredictable humans can be. You thought you had all the power, but now we got the upper hand." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking satisfied. The rest of the human fleet, though not as advanced as the Council's ships, had one key advantage: freedom. They weren't bound by the same rigid military tactics and protocols. They could adapt, think on their feet, and do the unexpected. The Council's ships were still trying to reboot their systems, their crews scrambling to restore control. Mark watched it all unfold on the screen, enjoying the chaos they had caused. "You know," he said, his voice casual, "it's kind of cute how you all think you're in charge." He paused, glancing over at his crew. "Here's the thing, though. The galaxy doesn't belong to you. It's ours now. And you'll have to deal with that. The alien leader's face twisted in anger. You are a fool, human. You cannot defeat us. You cannot defeat the Galactic Council. Mark's eyes gleamed with determination. Oh, we don't need to defeat you. We just need to make sure you understand one thing. You're not the only game in town anymore. The humans are here, and we're not going anywhere. With a snap of his fingers, Mark gave the order to the rest of the human fleet. The ships moved into position, surrounding the Council's fleet with ease. They weren't firing weapons or threatening destruction. Instead, they were blocking the Council's every move, forcing the once mighty fleet into a defensive position. The alien leader on the screen looked around at his fleet, panic starting to creep into his voice. This is impossible, he shouted. You cannot be doing this. You are nothing but a primitive species. Mark chuckled again, his voice low and confident. Maybe. But we're a species that doesn't take no for an answer, and we're not going to let some old, tired council tell us how to live. He leaned closer to the screen, his grin widening. You wanted a challenge. Well, you've got one. The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. Mark had made his point. The council was no longer the unstoppable force it once was. The humans had arrived, and they had every intention of shaking things up. The first battle had been won, not by firepower, but by audacity, by the simple truth that the human spirit could never be cowed by authority. Mark Steele and his crew weren't just making a statement. They were beginning a new chapter in galactic history. The Galactic Council was in turmoil. Their once pristine fleets, capable of wiping out entire species, were now completely shut down. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, yet they had taken control of the situation with ease. For the first time in centuries, the Council wasn't in control, and it was all because of one small fleet, led by Captain Mark Steele. After the EMP pulse that disabled the Council's ships, the humans didn't stop. They didn't leave. Instead, they did what Mark Steele did best, mocked the Council, and they did it in a way that made the entire galaxy laugh. The humans took over the galactic communication channels, broadcasting across the stars. Mark's voice, smooth and confident, filled every corner of the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen of the galaxy, he began, his tone light and playful. I hope you're all enjoying the show, because trust me, it's just getting started. The Council, in a frantic attempt to regain some control, tried to interrupt the transmission. But Mark had fought ahead. He had already hijacked their communications network. Now his voice echoed through the Council's most private meetings, their war rooms, and even the homes of their leaders. Mark's broadcast was filled with a mix of humor and audacity. He made fun of the Council's grand military strategies and poked fun at the seriousness with which they treated their rules. As he spoke, he played clips of the Council's ships helplessly floating, unable to power up their weapons. He laughed. This is supposed to be the Great Galactic Council, the rulers of the galaxy. Looks like a bunch of overpaid bureaucrats with shiny toys, Mark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me, how's the view from your mighty space stations, huh? Not so great when you're staring down a human ship, is it? The entire galaxy was watching. The broadcast spread like wildfire. People from different species, some of whom had never even heard of humans, tuned in to hear the unexpected challenger. They laughed with Mark, at the expense of the Council. The Council's leaders were furious. In their grand halls, they met in an emergency session, trying to figure out how to stop the humans, but no one could come up with a solution. They were too shaken. They had underestimated humanity. Worse, they had underestimated Mark Steele. The human fleet wasn't just a military threat now, it was a symbol. A symbol of defiance, of freedom, of breaking free from the shackles of authority that the Council had imposed on the galaxy. The broadcast was being shared across the stars, and people from all over the galaxy were beginning to talk about it. The Council's leaders realized they had to act fast before things got out of hand. They ordered a response, hoping to intimidate the humans into submission. A fleet of their most advanced ships was deployed to deal with Mark's small fleet, but Mark had already planned for that. Instead of running or hiding, Mark and his fleet set up a new broadcast. This time, it was a live feed of the Council's fleet being disarmed and brought into a mock parade by human ships. The humans weren't firing weapons, they weren't engaging in violence. They were simply showing off their new game. "Look at this, folks," Mark said in the new broadcast. The mighty fleet of the Galactic Council, captured and paraded around like prize cows. Isn't it beautiful? You'd think they'd have a little more dignity. But nope, we've got them on a leash. The feed showed Council ships, once mighty and feared, being slowly tugged along by human ships. The humans were treating them like trophies, dragging them through space, showing them off like toys. It was a complete mockery. The Council's once proud fleets now looked weak and helpless. The galaxy erupted in laughter. Everywhere people were sharing the broadcast, mocking the once powerful Council. Even some of the Council's own allies couldn't help but laugh. Many had long been unhappy with the Council's grip on power, but now, it seemed like the humans were giving them an opportunity to see what true freedom looked like. The humans weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for everyone who had ever been controlled or oppressed. Back aboard Freedom's Call, Mark and his crew watched the chaos unfold. They were still in the midst of their own broadcast, making light of the Council's misery, when Mark spoke to his crew with a satisfied grin. "Well, folks, I think we've made our point," Mark said. "The galaxy is waking up. The Council's power is slipping. And we're just getting started." Lieutenant Kim chuckled from her station. "I think they'll be laughing for a long time, Captain." "Good," Mark replied, his eyes sparkling. "Let's make sure they remember that the humans are the last species they should ever underestimate." The Council had underestimated humanity, and now the galaxy was laughing. Mark Steele and his crew had ignited something they couldn't control. The mockery had begun, and there was no turning back. Across the galaxy, the events unfolding before the eyes of millions began to stir something unexpected. Mark Steele's broadcasts, filled with humor and defiance, had shaken the Galactic Council to its core. But something else was happening that even Mark hadn't anticipated: the ripple effect. People from all corners of the galaxy, from peaceful planets to militarized systems, started taking notice. The humdrum of daily life on countless worlds had been interrupted by the audacity of one small human fleet, mocking the greatest power in the galaxy. News channels, social media, and even quiet corners of galactic forums buzzed with the same questions. Who are these humans? How did they do it? A strange sense of unity began to form. Species that had once felt helpless, controlled by the unyielding grip of the Council, began to wonder if it was possible to break free. Some were inspired to act, while others simply sat back and watched as their long-held fears about the Council's power began to crumble. Back aboard the Freedom's Call, Mark Steele and his crew sat in the mess hall, watching the latest feed of their broadcast. It was strange, seeing their words reach so many people, so many different species, all of them laughing, questioning, and even celebrating the humiliation of the Galactic Council. "I never thought they'd take us seriously," Lieutenant Kim said, shaking her head in disbelief. "But look at them now. People are starting to believe it. We've done it." Mark smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "No, we haven't done it yet. We've just opened the door. The real work starts now." Suddenly, the communications console chimed. Lieutenant Kim quickly answered, her face turning serious as she read the incoming message. It was from a nearby planet called Vorex, a small but proud world that had always remained neutral in galactic politics. They had no military, no great resources, but they had a deep resentment of the Council's oppression. "They want to speak with you, Captain," Kim said, looking up. "They're asking for a meeting." Mark raised an eyebrow. "A meeting? With us?" He leaned forward, intrigued. "Put it through." A few moments later, the screen flickered, and a new face appeared. an elderly man with silver-gray skin, his eyes wise and filled with quiet strength. He wore the robes of a Vorexian elder. The man nodded in greeting, his voice calm yet filled with urgency. "Captain Steele," he began, "we have watched your actions with great interest. You have stirred something in the galaxy, something long dormant. You have shown us that it is possible to stand up to the Council." Mark leaned forward. "That's the idea." The elder's gaze softened. "We wish to talk. For years, our people have lived under the shadow of the Council. We've remained neutral, but in truth, we are tired. We cannot remain silent any longer. We want to join you." Mark smiled, a sense of realization dawning on him. "You want to fight back?" The elder nodded. "Yes, we may not have the military power of the Council, but we have knowledge, we have strategies, and most importantly, we have the will to resist." Mark's smile widened. This was it, the beginning of something bigger. He knew that the Vorexians weren't the only ones watching. They were just the first to step forward. He could feel it. Others were waiting for their moment, watching to see what would happen next. "All right," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's talk about how we can make this work. We're going to need all the help we can get." As the conversation with the Vorexian elder continued, Mark's mind raced with possibilities. What started as a small act of defiance, a mockery of the Council's authority, was now spiraling into something much larger. The Vorexians were just the beginning. Mark knew that if this kept going, if the sparks of rebellion spread, they could form something much stronger than a single fleet. The ripple effect had started with a laugh, a joke at the Council's expense, but now it was spreading across the galaxy. A spark had turned into a fire, and soon it would be unstoppable. The human fleet, once a small and isolated force, was now at the heart of something far greater than anyone had imagined. The Vorexians had made their decision, and their people were already preparing to offer their knowledge and strategies. But Mark Steele knew that this was just the beginning. He could feel the excitement building. Something big was happening, something he had only dreamed of. After the conversation with the Vorexian elder, Mark called a meeting on the Freedom's Call to discuss the next steps. His crew gathered in the command center, their faces lit by the glow of the screens in front of them. They were all aware of how far they had come, but none of them could fully grasp the scope of what was unfolding. "All right, people," Mark began, standing before them. "We've made our point, and we've got the attention of the galaxy. The Vorexians are ready to join us. But we need more. This has to be bigger. We need more worlds to see that the Council isn't invincible." Lieutenant Kim, standing beside Mark, spoke up. "We've got the Vorexians, but they're a small force. We need allies with resources. We need planets with military power, or we're just going to be an inconvenience." Mark nodded. "Exactly. We need to go after the big players. We need to hit the Council where it hurts." The crew spent hours discussing their next moves. They mapped out the Council's most strategic territories and the planets that could be persuaded to join their cause. There were a few in particular, worlds with powerful fleets or valuable resources, who might be willing to break their alliance with the Council. It was risky. Every step they took toward expanding the rebellion could be met with fierce retaliation. But Mark didn't care. He was committed now, and he could feel the weight of what they were doing. This was no longer just about mocking the Council. It was about starting a revolution. Meanwhile, back in Council space, things were unraveling. The broadcasts from the Freedom's Call had caused a firestorm. Even the most loyal of the Council's allies were beginning to question their allegiance. Some had started to see the truth. Maybe the Council's reign of control wasn't as secure as they thought. The once mighty Galactic Council was starting to lose its grip. In the heart of Council territory, the high-ranking leaders gathered in an emergency session. The alien leader who had first spoken to Mark, the one with the sharp eyes and imposing presence, was pacing in front of a large table filled with holographic maps and data streams. "We cannot allow this to continue," the leader said, his voice cold with frustration. This human rebellion is spreading like wildfire. It's becoming more than just a nuisance. We must act now before it becomes a real threat. One of the other council members, a tall, insectoid being, clicked its mandibles and thought, "How do we stop them? We've tried everything. Threats, intimidation, force. Nothing works. They mock us. They make us look weak." The alien leader turned sharply, glaring at the others. "You think I don't know that? We've underestimated them. The humans are unlike any species we faced. But now, we'll make them pay. We will send everything we have to crush this rebellion." Back on the Freedom's Call, Mark and his crew prepared to act. They had gathered a small coalition of worlds, and they were ready to take the next step. Their first target, a strategically important world called Draklor. It was rich in resources, and the Council had always relied on it for supplies. If the humans could take it, it would be a major blow to the Council's power. "We need to move quickly," Mark said, his eyes sharp. "The longer we wait, the harder it will be to take Draklor. We can't let the Council recover. We hit them now." The fleet made its way toward Draklor, and as they approached the planet, Mark could sense the tension in the air. This would be their first true battle since the events with the Phyrexians. They were no longer just mocking the Council. They were taking action. As the Freedom's Call and the rest of the human fleet moved into position, the first sign of resistance came in the form of Council ships. A small fleet, much larger than the human ships, moved into orbit around Draklor, preparing to defend the planet. But Mark wasn't worried. The humans had learned much from their earlier successes, and now they were ready to fight. "Brace yourselves," Mark said, his voice calm. "It's time to show the galaxy that we're not just a joke. We're here to win." The battle began with a flash of light as the human ships opened fire on the Council's fleet. The first round of shots was enough to destabilize the Council's defense systems, causing a chain reaction that left their ships vulnerable. Mark's fleet pressed forward, pushing the Council back, slowly but surely. As the battle raged on, Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was it. The humans were proving their worth. The Phyrexians were watching, and more species were beginning to join the cause. The rebellion was growing. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future where the Council no longer controlled the galaxy. And with each victory, that future seemed a little bit closer. The tide was rising. And the humans, under Mark Steele's leadership, were at the forefront of it all. The battle for Draklor had been a success. The human fleet, under the command of Captain Mark Steele, had taken control of the planet's strategic resources. The Council's forces had been pushed back, their ships scattered, and their plans disrupted. The victory sent a shockwave through the galaxy. If the humans could take Draklor, what else could they accomplish? The newly formed alliance of worlds continued to grow. Planets that had once been hesitant now saw the humans not as a threat, but as a symbol of hope. Mark Steele was no longer just a captain. He had become a leader of something much bigger. His small, defiant fleet was now at the center of a revolution. Back aboard the Freedom's Call, Mark stood before his crew, the weight of their successes and challenges hanging in the air. The room was filled with quiet anticipation. Everyone knew that the next step was critical. The next target, Zyphor, the largest and most powerful world in the Council's control. "All right, everyone," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "We've won here, but the real challenge lies ahead. Zyphor is the heart of the Council's power. If we can take it, we can deal a blow they'll never recover from. But this won't be easy. They'll throw everything they've got at us." Lieutenant Kim nodded, her face serious. "We've already proven they're not invincible. But Zyphor, they'll fight with everything they have." Mark met her gaze. "And we'll fight with everything we've got too. We've come this far. We can't stop now." As the fleet prepared for the assault on Zyphor, the mood was a mix of determination and anticipation. Mark's crew, once just a group of soldiers, had become something more. They were part of a larger movement now, fighting for freedom and justice, not just for themselves, but for the galaxy. The Sci-Fi mission wasn't just about a fight. It was about proving that the Council could be beaten. If they succeeded, the Council's rule would come crashing down. If they failed, it could mean the end of the rebellion. The fleet arrived at Sci-Fi's orbit, and Mark's heart pounded in his chest. The planet below was a massive fortress, a stronghold for the Council's most advanced ships. The Xiphorians, the planet's military leaders, were known for their ruthlessness and technological superiority. But Mark had a plan. "This is it, people," Mark said as he looked out at the approaching planet. "We're going in hard and fast. No hesitation. We hit them before they can react. They'll never see us coming." The human fleet broke into smaller groups, each ship targeting a different part of Sci-Fi's defenses. The Council wasn't expecting an assault of this scale from such a small force. Mark's plan was to hit them with everything they had: surprise, speed, and the confidence that had carried them this far. The first wave of human ships launched a barrage of fire, aimed at disabling the Council's main defense systems. Explosions rang out across the surface of Sci-Fi as the human ships struck their targets with pinpoint accuracy. The Council's defenses began to crumble. Mark's heart raced. They were doing it. The tide had truly turned. The second wave of ships moved in, targeting the planetary shields and weak points in Sci-Fi's infrastructure. Mark watched as the enemy fleet scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The humans had gained the upper hand. "This is it, the final push," Mark said, his voice calm and focused. "All ships, concentrate fire on the main command center. We take that, and we take Sci-Fi." The human fleet closed in on the heart of the planet's defenses. It was a risky move, but Mark knew it was their best shot. If they could cripple the Council's command center, the battle would be won. As they reached the final target, the Council's ships attempted to regroup, but the human fleet was relentless. Mark's eyes were fixed on the main command center, the beating heart of Sci-Fi. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment. With a final massive blast, the command center's defenses were shattered. The human ships surged forward, breaking through the last line of resistance. The Council's flagship, once a symbol of their power, was now drifting in space, incapacitated. The galaxy was watching. Mark Steele stood tall, his hand gripping the arm of his chair as he watched the destruction unfold on the monitors. The Council had been defeated. "We did it," Lieutenant Kim whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the view of Sci-Fi. "No, we didn't just do it. We changed everything." The broadcast from the human fleet was now live across the galaxy, showing the victory over Sci-Fi and the fall of the Council's power. Planets everywhere were celebrating. The Council, once an unchallenged authority, was now in retreat. Mark Steele had led humanity to victory, and in doing so, he had sparked a revolution that would change the galaxy forever. The fight was far from over, but now, the galaxy knew one thing for certain: humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and the stars themselves were now open to them.